Hello. Welcome back. Mind your damn business. That's the overall theme of the story you're about to listen to.
Audrey Miller is about to learn the hard way that some curiosities are better left unsatisfied. When the true crime podcaster receives an anonymous tip about a bizarre disappearance at the abandoned Meadowbrook Sanatorium, her obsession with uncovering the truth propels her to investigate despite all warnings. But as she tears away the institution's grim facade, Audrey awakens a terrifying presence that has lingered in the shadows for decades, a vengeful force determined to punish those who can't mind their own business. Trapped in a waking nightmare where malevolent whispers slither from every dark corner, Audrey is forced to confront both the sanatorium's nightmarish history and her own haunted psyche. In the end, she must answer one horrifying question. Are some truths too dark and sinister to ever be brought into the light? And now, without further ado, Chapter 1. The Anonymous Tip. Audrey Miller took a sip of her lukewarm coffee and grimaced. She had been hunched over her laptop for hours, scouring the internet for the next gripping true crime story to feature on her podcast.
In the shadows.
Her relentless passion for uncovering the truth behind unsolved mysteries was both a blessing and a curse. Just as she was about to call it a night, a new email appeared in her inbox with no sender information. Intrigued, Audrey opened it, and her eyes widened as she read the chilling message.
If you're brave enough to dig up the past, search for what happened to Emma Wilkins at the Meadowbrook Sanatorium in 1976.
Audrey's heart raced. The Meadowbrook Sanatorium had been abandoned for decades, a decrepit shell of its former self, with rumors of unimaginable horrors lurking within its crumbling walls. She had toyed with the idea of investigating the sanatorium before but always dismissed it as too risky, too likely to dredge up things better left undisturbed. And yet, the anonymous tip ignited a fire within her. Emma Wilkins was a name she had never heard before, but the thought of an innocent life being lost to the sanatorium's shadowy past was more than enough to pique her morbid curiosity. With trembling fingers, Audrey began her research, poring over old newspaper clippings and police reports from that fateful year. The details were scarce, but the picture they painted was deeply unsettling. Emma Wilkins, a young nurse fresh out of school, had taken a job at the Meadowbrook Sanatorium in the spring of 1976. By all accounts, she was a kind, dedicated woman who saw her work as more than just a job. It was a calling. But after only 3 months of employment, Emma had simply vanished. The missing persons report, filed by her distraught parents, described a woman who had seemingly walked off the face of the earth. Her car remained in the staff parking lot, her personal belongings untouched in her living quarters. It was as if she had evaporated into thin air. Despite an extensive investigation, no clues to Emma's whereabouts or fate were ever uncovered. The case went cold, another statistic in the endless pile of unsolved disappearances. As Audrey dug deeper, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story. Dark secrets buried beneath the surface that had been left to fester for far too long. The anonymous tip was an omen, a challenge she couldn't ignore. With a steadying breath, Audrey began packing her recording equipment and preparing for the trip to the abandoned sanatorium. She knew the risks, knew that she was likely poking a slumbering beast that would be better off left alone. But Emma Wilkins deserved to have her story told, her truth brought into the light after all these years. And Audrey was determined to be the one to do it, no matter what she might uncover in those derelict halls. As she zipped up her backpack, a tingle of anticipation and dread traveled up her spine. There was no turning back now. She was going to crack open this cold case, even if it meant coming face to face with the darkest corners of human depravity. Little did Audrey know, the shadows she was so eager to confront had been waiting for her all along, hungering for the opportunity to drag her into their eternal embrace. Chapter 2. The Abandoned Sanatorium. The journey to the Meadowbrook Sanatorium took Audrey deep into the heart of the isolated Appalachian Mountains. As her car navigated the winding back roads, phone signal and signs of civilization quickly fell away until all that remained was the looming presence of the thickly forested ridges. By the time she reached the rusted gates of the sanatorium grounds, a sense of dread had settled heavy in the pit of her stomach. The imposing brick edifice stood as a grim monument to an era of medical practices that valued brutality over compassion. Audrey grabbed her equipment and ventured inside, the crunch of dead leaves and debris beneath her feet echoing through the ghostly silence. She swept her flashlight beam across the crumbling entrance hall, the once grandiose chandeliers now hanging askew like nooses from the water-stained ceiling.
This is Audrey Miller, recording at the abandoned Meadowbrook Sanatorium on May 14th.
She said into her microphone, her voice wavering slightly.
I'm here to investigate the disappearance of Emma Wilkins, a young nurse who went missing from this facility in 1976 under mysterious circumstances.
As she pressed deeper inside, the stale, musty air took on an almost smoky quality that stung her nostrils. Peeling wallpaper and shattered glass crunched underfoot, remnants of the lives that had once passed through these halls. Audrey moved her light across the rusted metal frame of an ancient hospital bed, letting her imagination run wild with visions of restraints and archaic lobotomies. A faint scrabbling noise up ahead made her freeze in her tracks, her heartbeat thundering in her ears as she swept the beam back and forth.
Hello?
She called out, hating how small her voice sounded in the deathly silence. No response. Willing her nerves to steady, Audrey continued on until she reached what appeared to be the remnants of the nursing staff quarters. Rows of bare metal frames lined the walls where narrow cots had once rested. In the corner, a tattered teddy bear missing one eye stared vacantly at her. Shining the light across the far wall, Audrey's breath caught in her throat. Scrawled in what looked unnervingly like dried blood were the words,
"They're still here."
A violent chill raced down her spine as her mind raced. Who? Or what could have left such a disturbing message? Was this part of a cruel prank? Or a terrible omen of something far more sinister? Audrey startled as a loud crash rang out from somewhere behind her, like a heavy door slamming in the depths of the corridors. Her pulse hammered as she spun around, growing more unnerved by the second.
Who's there?
She shouted, her voice echoing off the cracked tiles as her hands trembled violently.
I'm warning you, I'm armed!
An icy silence was her only response. Audrey strained to hear any other sounds, footsteps, a whisper, anything to indicate another living presence. But the sanatorium seemed to have gone as deathly still as a mausoleum. Fighting back the tsunami of panic threatening to overwhelm her senses, Audrey took a few deep, steadying breaths. She was likely alone, and even if she wasn't, her mini tape recorder and Swiss Army knife wouldn't be much defense against any malicious forces lurking within these walls. But something was happening here, something that felt unnatural. As absurd as it seemed, Audrey couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, studied, by something far older and more insidious than could be rationally explained. Deep in her gut, a primordial voice was screaming at her to leave this forsaken place and never look back. With a Herculean effort, Audrey forced the terror down and steadied her hands on the microphone. If this was going to be her last recording, she was damn sure going to make it count.
My name is Audrey Miller,
she said, her voice regaining its strength and conviction.
and I'm not leaving here until I find out what happened to Emma Wilkins, no matter what secrets this place is hiding. This is far from over.
Squaring her shoulders, Audrey pressed onwards into the shadowy depths, unaware of the malevolent presence watching her every move through the ruined walls, patiently biding its time to strike. Chapter 3. The Dark History. As the pale moonlight filtered through the shattered windows, Audrey felt a growing sense of dread creeping up her spine. Every creak and groan of the decaying sanatorium seemed to carry the whispers of the damned. She pressed on through the labyrinth of corridors, the air growing thicker and more oppressive with each step. Her earlier bravado was rapidly giving way to a gnawing feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. Rounding a corner, Audrey's beam fell upon a heavy rusted door, slightly ajar. She could just make out faded lettering that read,
"Records Archive."
A jolt of anticipation coursed through her veins. If she could find the personnel files and incident reports from 1976, perhaps she could uncover what really happened to Emma Wilkins. The door's hinges protested with an otherworldly screech as Audrey pulled it open, filling the stale air with a cloud of dust and debris. Coughing, she swept her light across the cramped, claustrophobic space lined with row upon row of metal filing cabinets and overturned shelves.
The universal truth of entropy.
She muttered into her mic.
No matter how solid and permanent something appears, given enough time and neglect, everything eventually succumbs to decay and ruin.
Spurred on by a surge of determination, Audrey began digging through the haphazard stacks of document boxes, shifting aside decades of accumulated filth. Faded manila folders spilled their contents across the floor. Admission forms, medical evaluations, incident reports, glimpses into lives confined within these walls, tortured and discarded. One particular file caught her eye amidst the chaos, its weathered cover bearing a single name:
Dr. Matthias Grimwood.
Audrey's breath caught in her throat as she opened the dossier, a cold sense of dread blooming in her chest. She knew that name, had read the horrifying accounts of Dr. Grimwood's radical, unethical
Therapeutic regression
treatments used on patients during his tenure as chief of staff in the 1940s and 50s. Grimwood's twisted philosophy posited that mentally ill patients could be
cured
by forcibly regressing them to infantile mental states through extreme deprivation, isolation, and even torture, all in an effort to have them rebuild their psyches from scratch. His merciless techniques, carried out in the shadows of the sanatorium, were nothing short of institutional abuse on a mind-numbing scale. As Audrey pored over the damning evidence, a terrifying picture began to take shape. Former patients described being kept in total darkness for months, or strapped to gurneys in pitch-black cells, with doctors and nurses taunting them like children. Grimwood even went so far as to have underlings dress as demonic entities and torture patients as part of their
therapeutic
regimen. Though Grimwood had supposedly met an untimely demise in 1958, Audrey couldn't shake the feeling that the sickening legacy of his methodologies lingered like a cancer through the very bricks and soil of Meadowbrook. Audrey continued excavating the archival remains, her mind racing as she unearthed more and more damning accounts, reports of illegal experimentation with psychotropic drugs and fringe therapies, criminal levels of patient abuse and neglect, even sinister references to occult rituals being conducted within the bowels of the sanatorium. A heavy sense of revulsion churned in Audrey's gut as she finally found the file she had been searching for, the personnel record of Emma Wilkins. The details were painfully scant, with no indication of what had befallen the young nurse over 40 years ago. But one particular line in her employment review leapt off the page, feeling like a lead weight in Audrey's trembling hands.
Nurse Wilkins has an unfortunate habit of being unable to mind her own business. If she keeps sticking her nose where it doesn't belong, her curiosity may very well lead her into a situation none of us can protect her from.
Audrey's blood turned to ice as she read and reread those ominous words. Had Emma discovered something so abhorrent during her duties that it had led to her disappearance? Or worse? A stark realization gripped Audrey with vice-like intensity. No matter what Meadowbrook's secrets were, disturbing them had awoken something ancient and horrible slumbering within its accursed depths. And that something was now aware of her presence, observing her every move as she inched closer to the heart of its dark, twisted truth.
Like the story you're listening to? Then why not check out the tea that inspired this tea, the Mind Your Damn Business tea, at my apparel site, justtextclothing.com. The info you need to know is on your screen, or in the description. Now back to the Haunted Podcast.
Chapter 4. The Haunting. The air felt heavier with each passing minute, as if the weight of Meadowbrook's horrific history was pressing down on Audrey's shoulders. She struggled to catch her breath, dark tendrils of dread coiling around her heart.
Based on what I've uncovered so far, it's becoming disturbingly clear that something deeply disturbing occurred within these walls.
She said into her recorder, her voice wavering.
Whatever happened to Emma Wilkins, I can't shake the feeling that her fate was somehow tied to the depravities Dr. Grimwood and his ilk perpetrated here in the name of barbaric pseudoscience.
A deafening crash suddenly exploded from the hall behind her, like a bank vault door slamming shut. Audrey's heart seized as she spun around, her light dancing across the shadowed corridor.
"Who's there?"
she shouted, the tremble in her voice betraying the cold grip of fear taking hold.
"I'm warning you, I'm armed."
Only silence answered her desperate call, looming and palpable in the darkness. Audrey opened her mouth to issue another threat, but the words caught in her constricting throat as an unnatural, bone-chilling wail shattered the stillness. The haunting cry seemed to reverberate from every direction at once, surrounding her in a maelstrom of primal anguish. Audrey's hands flew to cover her ears, but the piercing lament carried on undisturbed, feeling as if it were being piped directly into her skull. Visions exploded behind her tightly shut eyelids in rapid succession. Fleeting glimpses of decaying hospital wards, padded cells stained with viscera, and twisted, inhuman faces leering from the shadows. Terror gripped Audrey with icy talons as the shrieking seemed to take on myriad agonized voices, all pleading for merciful oblivion. Just when she felt her sanity beginning to splinter, the cacophony ceased as abruptly as it had begun. A ringing silence pressed in all around her as she collapsed to her knees, gasping for air.
No! No, that wasn't right.
Beneath the oppressive quiet, a new sound wormed its way into her consciousness, a soft rhythmic patter like bare footsteps shuffling across tile. With mounting trepidation, Audrey forced herself to look up, sweeping her light in a slow arc. At first, all seemed still and shrouded in shadow. But then, a flicker of movement at the periphery of the beam made her freeze. There, silhouetted in the darkness of a ruined examination room, stood the unmistakable form of a person. Its head was cocked slightly, unmoving, as if observing her like a frozen sculpture.
Hello?
Audrey choked out, her voice a dry rasp.
Is someone there? Please, I'm just trying to find out what happened here.
The motionless silhouette offered no response, no indication of life or awareness. But as Audrey continued to pour the beam over its unmoving shape, icy tendrils of dread took root in her mind. For though the darkness obscured its face and features, she could clearly make out one unavoidable, terrifying detail. Where its feet should have been, there was only an empty void, as if the entity were hovering, unbound by terrestrial gravity. Audrey scrambled back in horror, her hands shaking violently as she fumbled for her recording device.
Oh God! Oh my God! There's something here!
She hissed in a strangled whisper.
Some malevolent presence, something not of this world. I don't know what it is, but I can feel it watching me, probing my mind like a predator circling its prey.
No sooner had the words tumbled from her lips than the phantom shape shifted with a boneless, unnatural fluidity. Though its features remained concealed, Audrey felt its focus burning into her with the intensity of a laser. A blistering volley of images detonated in her psyche, twisted, demonic faces, cloaked silhouettes moving in calculated ritual, agonized bodies thrashing in restraints, a hellish slideshow accompanied by a chorus of anguished screams reverberating inside her mind. White-hot panic exploded in Audrey's core as she backpedaled madly, her foot connecting with a piece of debris that sent her crashing to the floor. Desperate, animalistic sobs tore from her throat as she curled into a fetal ball, praying for the waking nightmare to end. Through a kaleidoscope of tears, Audrey saw the entity slowly drift towards her, an ominous sentient fog drifting across the floor. As it neared, a bone-deep chill seemed to leach the very warmth from her body. She opened her mouth to scream, but only a withered croak escaped. The shapeless force came to rest mere inches from her face, seeming to undulate and churn with otherworldly currents. A gnarled, disembodied whisper slithered forth like icy tendrils caressing her thoughts.
You should have minded your own business, foolish girl.
Audrey's world detonated into a yawning abyss of infinite cold and shadow, and as her mind teetered on the brink of obliteration, she knew in her very marrow that she had awakened an ancient evil that would never allow her to escape its clutches. At long last, the horrific truth of Meadowbrook had emerged from the abyss to consume her whole. Chapter 5. The Twisted Truth. Audrey's world was a spinning vortex of shadow and ice. The malevolent presence seemed to leach the very warmth from her soul, as it loomed impossibly close.
You should have minded your own business, foolish girl.
The gnarled whisper slithered through her consciousness like a viscous eel, carrying with it a wave of existential dread. She wanted to scream, to flee, to do anything to escape this waking nightmare. But some unseen force had her paralyzed, an insect transfixed in the ritualistic thrall of a merciless predator. Just as the entity's tendrils of icy malice prepared to fully envelop her, a sound cut through the suffocating stillness, the unmistakable ping of an incoming video call from her laptop. Audrey's eyes snapped open as the sanatorium seemed to judder and blur around the edges like a glitch in reality. With a sickening lurch of vertigo, the hellish miasma dissipated in an instant. One disorienting blink later, Audrey found herself slumped against the wall of Emma Wilkins' office, her laptop propped open before her. On the screen, A grainy video feed resolved into the devilish grin of Mason Riley, a former colleague she had stupidly trusted one too many times.
Well, well, well.
The smug voice crackled over the speakers.
I must say, you really sold that look of abject horror, Audrey. For a minute there, I actually thought you believed you were being haunted.
Audrey's mind whirled as the pieces finally fell into place. The anonymous tip, the disturbing occurrences, the malevolent presence. It had all been an elaborately staged deception by Mason to gaslight and torment her. White-hot rage quickly followed the realization, burning through the lingering tendrils of panic. She snatched up the laptop, glaring furiously into the camera.
You sick, twisted son of a bitch.
She snarled, her chest heaving.
What is wrong with you? Do you have any idea how far you've gone this time?
Mason's laugh was a bark of pure sociopathic glee.
Oh, lighten up, Audrey! I was just having a bit of fun, giving you a taste of your own medicine for once.
His expression softened to one of mock sympathy.
You spend so much time chasing other people's ghosts and demons. I figured it was high time you came face to face with a few of your own.
By tormenting me?
Audrey shook her head in disgust.
Seriously, Mason, even for you this is a new low. I could have had a heart attack. Or worse.
But you didn't.
Mason countered with an indifferent shrug.
You're still here, relatively unscathed. Just a vigorous life experience is all.
He leaned in conspiratorially, his voice taking on a vindictive edge.
Let's be honest, Audrey, you've made a hell of a lot of enemies over the years by always meddling in other people's tragedies and sticking that beak of yours where it doesn't belong. This was a long time coming.
Audrey recoiled, feeling as if she'd been slapped. She opened her mouth to protest, but Mason barreled on relentlessly.
I mean, look at you chasing down Cold Case McGee like she's the modern-day Amelia Earhart instead of some inconsequential loser who clearly wanted to disappear. Did it never occur to you that she might have had her reasons for leaving her old life behind? That maybe she was happier wherever she ended up?
The words landed like physical blows, each one stripping away another layer of self-righteousness Audrey had deluded herself into believing. Her chest constricted as the deeply buried seed of doubt she always fought to ignore took root. What if Mason was right? What if by doggedly pursuing these cases, she was only dredging up misery and pain for those who had already suffered enough? All in an obsessive quest to feed her own morbid curiosity under the guise of
Finding the truth.
The thought caused bile to rise in her throat. Mason, sensing his barbs had struck their mark, smiled a wolfish grin of triumph.
That's it, Audrey, have that long overdue crisis of conscience. Take a good, hard look at the trail of wrecked lives and emotional carnage you've left behind in your little narcissistic quest to be a big-shot podcast savior.
He leaned back, crossing his arms with a derisive sneer.
But don't worry, this little Halloween haunting was just a kick in the pants you needed to gain a bit of perspective. Be grateful I was there to provide the rude awakening before you derailed someone else's life with your insatiable meddling.
Audrey stared at the screen, numb with the weight of Mason's scathing diatribe. Her mind felt like a shattered mirror, every fractured shard reflecting back her own selfish obsession and blindness in vivid, sickening clarity. As the full horrific scope of what she had allowed herself to become washed over her, Audrey was gripped by the cold, inescapable reality. The true monster here was her, and the most terrifying abyss she had peered into was the one separating her from her own lost humanity. Mason's laughter echoed from the laptop speakers like a death knell, sealing Audrey's entombment within the haunting prison of her own tormented psyche. There would be no escape this time, no sanctuary from the eternal darkness her truth had awakened.
Like, share, subscribe, comment, all that jib-jab. Click one of the other videos you see on your screen. Okay. That's it for me now. See you in the future.